This is Theory of Change. I'm Matthew Sheffield. Thanks for joining me for another episode. We have a very different one today. It is a topic that, if you're not familiar with it, is definitely going to be one of the weirder ones that you have watched. But before we get into that, I just wanted to mention that we're part of the Flux Media Network. So go to flux.community for more articles and podcasts about politics, religion, media, and technology, and how they all intersect. And if you want to get the archives of this show, just go to theoryofchange.show, and we have video, transcript, and audio of every episode. And if you have a paid subscription, you have unlimited access to all the episodes, plus two other podcasts that we have at Flux, Doom Scroll, our comedy news panel, and So This Just Happened, our news conversation show. So I encourage you to check both of those out, and please do support us on Patreon or on Substack. So just go to patreon.com/discoverflix. All right. So with that little plug out of the way, let's get into today's episode. Truth, as they say, is stranger than fiction, and that is nowhere more the case than in the philosophy of TESCREALism, a new philosophy that is capturing the minds of the world's richest people. And if you've never heard of it, TESCREALism, well, this is going to be one of the weirdest conversations you've ever witnessed. But it is an important philosophy, and it is an obsession. What it boils down to is an obsession with the end of humanity, and it is a rebranding of radical right-wing beliefs in a secular religion in many ways. And one person who has really understood all this very well is Émile Torres. He is our guest on this episode, and he's the author of a new book called Human Extinction, A History of Science and Ethics of Annihilation, of the Science and Ethics of Annihilation. So welcome to Theory of Change, Phil.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. All right. So TESCREALism. First of all, what does TESCREAL stand for?
Good question. Yeah. So, prepare yourself for a bunch of really big polysyllabic words. It's transhumanism, extropianism, Singularitarianism, Cosmism, Rationalism, effective altruism, and Longtermism. So these are a bunch of a constellation of ideologies that are that overlap in all sorts of ways, are interconnected, and so on, and ultimately I think should be seen as essentially just sort of one organism that extends back to the late 1980s, but perhaps even earlier in the 20th century up until the present. So that's what the bundle is.
Yeah, and to be clear, for the most part, the people who believe these ideas do not actually publicly admit to doing so. That is one of the interesting aspects here, right?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, there are a number of leading advocates, leading figures.
Well, for the individual items, they'll claim to believe in them, but not like the bundle, as you're calling it.
Yes, yeah. That's right. So you will have some people who say, like, yeah, I'm a transhumanist. I was part of the extropian movement. Also, sympathetic with or even excited about the sort of singularitarian thesis, and also a long-termist, effective altruist, and rationalist. But so there's some people who will say that, but at the same time going like, well, I'm I don't really identify with this acronym, which denotes the bundle of these overlapping and interrelated ideologies.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so let's maybe start with the. I do want to go through all of the items here. So let's start with the oldest one that kind of came on the scene first, which I guess probably would be transhumanism, right? So let's. What is transhumanism for people who don't know what that is?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, transhumanism, first of all, can be thought of as the backbone to the bundle. It's sort of the through line. It's a common denominator of a lot of these the subsequent ideologies. And one of the reasons that the acronym, I think, is useful is that the ideologies that it points to emerged historically in roughly the same chronology that the letters appear in the acronym. So you're exactly right that transhumanism is the oldest of these ideologies. And it's basically the idea that we should, develop advanced emerging technologies, synthetic biology, biotechnology, genetic engineering, advanced nanotechnology, artificial intelligence, and so on, and then use these technologies to radically re-engineer the human organism. So perhaps we could become immortal. We could overcome aging, so that our health span, the period of our lives during which we're healthy, can be extended indefinitely into the future. Or maybe we could, use brain-computer interfaces, which Elon Musk's company Neuralink is trying to develop, that would enable us to link our brains to computers. Maybe we could then access the internet without having to type, simply through thought alone. And so, there are other. Some transhumanists also have considered the possibility of developing technologies. I've called them like Mostropics, which is based on this term nootropics, which are cognitive enhancement pharmaceuticals of some sort. So Mostropics then would be the moral analog of that. So these are chemicals that we could use to enhance our morality, to amplify and augment our fundamental moral dispositions of altruism, a sense of justice, and so on. So yeah, so maybe we could become superhumanly moral by re-engineering the human organism. So behind transhumanism is this view that we are essentially machines, and improving the human condition is basically just an engineering problem. And so if we advance science, technology, and engineering sufficiently far enough, then we can just tinker with the human organism and turn us into this superior new race of post-human beings that are immoral, superhumanly intelligent, and so on.
Yeah, and it always had a political dimension to it as well. Transhumanism, it's not necessarily tied to one particular ideological side of the spectrum, and it is the case that transhumanism, especially in the early years, was kind of it was something that socialists were into, that communists were into. But it was definitely something that libertarians and right-wing anarchists were very into. You want to talk about that little dichotomy for a bit?
Yeah, sure. Without a doubt. I mean, the notion of transhumanism, even before the word was popularized in the second half of the 20th century, in particular by a biologist named Julian Huxley, the idea was developed by people on different sides of the political spectrum. JPS Haldane was basically a communist, and he was one of the earlier progenitors of the transhumanist notion that we can use technologies to essentially just transcend humanity, not just improve the human stock, which was the goal of traditional eugenics, but entirely create just a new, better version of us, call them post-humans. But really, in the late 1980s and early 1990s, when transhumanism sort of coalesced into a kind of cultural intellectual movement facilitated by the World Wide Web, and we'll mention this in a moment, an organization called the Extropianism Institute, which gave rise to Extropianism, which is really the first organized transhumanist movement. So yeah, in the late 1990s, when modern transhumanism emerged, that was really bound up with a sort of libertarian political outlook. And there are a bunch of reasons for this. But just to give an example of the extent to which this is the case, on the official reading list of the Extropianism Institute was Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. So they were, very, very inspired by the libertarian worldview. And yeah, ultimately, what they would say is okay, modern transhumanism is a version of liberal eugenics, whereas the old eugenics was authoritarian And the goal was to implement some kind of top-down regulatory regime that could modify society-wide patterns of reproduction, thereby improving humanity over transgenerational time. They said, actually, with emerging technologies, we don't need the state to be involved. It's not a transgenerational project. Maybe within a single lifetime or over just one generation, parent to child, we could use these technologies to radically re-engineer humanity. And so that dovetails with this kind of libertarian notion that we should be free as individuals to determine our own destiny in life.
Yeah.
Well,
and it also, and I'm sorry, it also does, I mean, it fits very well with the Ayn Rand sensibility as well, which, was explicitly atheistic and believed, that humans were the ultimate source of everything in terms of, morality or, reality itself. And so therefore, whatever humans wanted to do was okay. And there should be no limits on any individuals. And if you can, somehow, so the idea that if you could, that there should be no limits economically on you, then there should also be no technological limits on you either. And it's just like a continuous. It's just like Ayn Rand in space is what I call it sometimes when people ask me.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. I'm not sure I have that much more to add to it. But
Okay, well, we can go to the next one then if you want.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so I already mentioned, extropianism, the Extropy Institute, where extropy was supposed to be the sort of antonym of entropy, the opposite of entropy, and
Which is decay, just for people to clarify that decay, entropy.
yeah, essentially a measure of like the amount of disorder within a system. Extropy was all about creating order and in this in a universe that's otherwise governed by the second law of thermodynamics. And so the extropians just got really excited about these new emerging technologies. Maybe we can modify our germline so that our all future generations have been modified in some way. Maybe we can tinker with genes that are responsible for the size of our brains. And so these are actual proposals that people put forward. And so I don't know, the Extropy movement just one of the reasons I included in the acronym is not so much because of its contemporary presence as a well-defined kind of community, because it's more or less been superseded by subsequent ideologies and subsequent movements, but its legacy continues. So it played a really integral role in the development of transhumanism during the 1990s.
And sort of, radicalizing it, basically. Because I mean, I think it is important to note that, like a lot of the early transhumanists, they saw what they were doing as sort of being a benefit to all of humanity. And they wanted their efforts or these future hypothetical inventions to be available to everyone. And like, so, but, and that's, and to an extent, like you can see kind of the shadow of that in present day transhumanism, but it's been fundamentally altered by extropianism, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Okay. So all right, well, let's keep going then.
Sure. Yeah. So there were a lot of the next ideology that really took shape was probably the late 1990s, and this was singularitarianism. It has a particular emphasis on machine intelligence, artificial superintelligence, and this notion that we're going to merge with machines. Maybe our brains are going to be digitized. So we'll be uploaded to a computer. Maybe then we could live, embody some kind of like android robotic system to live in this particular world, or maybe we just migrate to a completely virtual reality. Uh,
Yeah. Well, and
and
and and and I'm sorry, just it's for
no, it's fine.
introductory purposes. So singularitarianism refers to the technological singularity, which is
Yeah,
a term that was popularized by the so-called, I hate the term futurist, but because it sounds so silly, but this guy named Ray Kurzweil, who came up with, who basically said, look, people at some point in the future, artificial intelligence will be, it will surpass human intelligence, and that will be the most significant event in human history,
yeah,
and it will be as if, it's a borrowed term from physics, the idea that when you get to the event horizon of a black hole, you cannot escape that gravitational pull. And so whatever happens, you're committed to it regardless of what happened. Like what you want is going to be, everything will be fundamentally different after that point. And so that's the term singularity for people who are not familiar with it. But yeah, continue. I'm sorry.
no, no, yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, not only can you not escape the singularity of a black hole, but you escape beyond the event horizon, but you can't see beyond it because the
Yeah.
gravitational pull of the black hole is so immense due to its extraordinary density. Light
Mhm.
photons cannot escape the pool of the black hole. So the event horizon is that point beyond which light is no longer able to. So by analogy, then the technological singularity will mark this moment that where change, technological and scientific change, becomes so rapid as a result of us merging with machines, maybe as a result of just creating some kind of machine superintelligence that recursively self-improves and therefore becomes, radically superintelligent over a very short period of time. Um, we're just unable to imagine what the world
Proceed.
would be.
Yeah. What comes next? Yeah.
Yeah, so it's just this phantasmagoria of extraordinarily rapid technological change that will mark a fundamental rupture in human history. And so Ray Kurzweil, he discussed the idea like in 1999 in his book The Age of Spiritual Machines, but it was really foregrounded in his 2005 book The Singularity is Near. And he divides all of cosmic history into these 6 epochs. And if I remember correctly, the division between the 4th and the 5th, that is when the singularity occurs, where we merge with machines, we create a artificial superintelligence, and then the key feature of the 6th epoch, the very last epoch in cosmic history, is where we spread out into space, and consequently, as he puts it, the universe itself wakes up. So we just spread consciousness throughout, our entire future light cone, which is the region of space that is theoretically accessible to us. And this idea, it's even though I think a lot of people, for example, individuals at OpenAI, like Shane Legg, co-founder, maybe Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, they probably would not describe themselves as singularitarians. They nonetheless have been hugely influenced by this idea. And you can even see echoes of it in the rhetoric of Elon Musk, for example, who talks about preserving and spreading the light of consciousness into the very far future. So that's very
Oh yeah.
consistent with this Kurzweilian notion of the 6th epoch in which the universe itself wakes up as a result of this colonization explosion, which itself follows the merging of humans and machines, the creation of artificial superintelligence, and this just exponential increase in the rate of
Yeah.
technological
And
development.
this is where some of the religion starts coming in, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I would say religion um, enters the picture at the very beginning with transhumanism, because I mean, the example I always give is that this idea, the term wasn't coined until I can't remember, like 1940s or something, but it wasn't popularized until 1959 with Julian Huxley's book New Bottles for New Wine. But nonetheless, Huxley developed the idea. I believe he referred to as evolutionary humanism initially, 30 years earlier in his 1929 book, which was revealingly titled Religion Without Revelation. And so transhumanism was supposed to be, from the very beginning, a
Mm.
secular replacement for religion. And so, yeah, I think basically what happened is like the 19th century, beginning of 19th century, Christianity was continued to be very dominant in the Western tradition. Throughout the 19th century, it declined significantly among the educated classes. This is when Friedrich Nietzsche said, God is dead, which then he adds, and he's dead because we killed him. Karl Marx denigrated religion as the opium of the masses. And so there just was this huge void, a religion-shaped void. And transhumanism was one of many secular systems that was proposed in the latter 19th century, early 20th century to fill that hole. So
well, and it's also, it's related to this idea that for a lot of people, religion is and I won't say that for everybody, but for a lot of people, the value of religion is that it helps them sort of satiate their craving for authority and for submission. And you really do see that with TESCREAL, and we'll get into that further. But like that's I think is like sometimes people it may seem difficult for them to when they will look at like a far right Christian fundamentalist who loves Elon Musk, who is an atheist transhumanist, and they and it doesn't, on paper that shouldn't happen, but ultimately they have the same sort of psychological impulse, which is they want authorities to dominate and rule because hierarchy is ultimately what they're going for. But
I mean, maybe it's just worth mentioning that the connection here also with libertarianism. I mean, libertarianism is advertised as an anti-authoritarian kind of system, but ultimately it's super authoritarian because libertarians are advocates of a free market system in which you have these huge companies, corporations that are supposed to be free and unconstrained by regulation. But those corporations themselves are they're authoritarian systems. They're monarchies in a sense. I mean, I think Walter Isaacson,
the economic freedom is the first and really only freedom that should exist under that framework. And so if economic freedom is all that matters, then you can be as authoritarian in your own fiefdom as you want. And there's nothing wrong with it, and no one can say anything about it. And that is ultimately why it is authoritarian.
Exactly.
But you're saying Walter Isaacson, though.
I mean, I think he mentions, or I don't know, there were some articles recently that mentioned that Musk sort of sees himself as a bit of a king, which it fits the hierarchical structure of these corporations in which people are, there's very rigid power relations between the different levels and so on. And then ultimately this kind of dictatorial control by the people at the top. Anyways, there are lots of interesting, connections here. And maybe one last thing worth mentioning relating to the connection between religion and, these ideologies is, so there are many ways in which transhumanism, singularitarianism, so on, are religious. It's very facile to put down some worldview or ideology but by labeling it a religion. You see this all over the place. Wokeness is religion, conservatism is religion, communism, and so on and so on. But I think in the case of these ideologies, it's that comparison, that categorization is really apt. I mean, so for example, they even have their own version of resurrection, right? So on the one hand, a lot of them think that if we get, if we live to witness the singularity, which Kurzweil prognosticates will happen in 2045. That's the exact year that it's supposed to happen.
Which God told him.
I mean, that itself is there's a long history of religious people predicting specific years when the second coming will happen and so on. So anyways, that itself looks very religious, but a lot of the reason, okay, if I live long enough to witness the singularity, then I get to live forever. But also maybe I could just have my body cryogenized if I die before then. So they even have their own version of resurrection. And there are lots of people in this community: Nick Bostrom, Andrew Sandberg, Robin Hanson.
Peter Thiel. Yeah.
Exactly, who have signed up with Alcor, a company based in California that just has this like large building with these big vats in which people are, in cryogenic suspension,
Which,
awaiting.
well, they
Yeah,
claim it's suspension, but like it's really just they froze someone. So like there's absolutely no guarantee that if humanity ever did develop this idea of cryogenic freezing,
mhm,
that they did it the right way. And like it is literally not like humans do not have the biological plumbing to do that. We just don't. And if we did,
yeah,
we would have done it. So that's the part I think is so hilarious. Like that they have this faith in this, and there's absolutely no guarantee. Like all the evidence suggests that whatever you do to yourself in this way, it's not going to work, even if
yeah,
it might work for other people in the future.
yeah. I mean, you're exactly right. There is a kind of faith in the power of technological progress. And so, okay, like maybe the way that we're cryogenizing these bodies today is not optimal, but we'll have such advanced technology in the future that even if there is damage to the microstructure of our brains in the future, we'll have the technologies to just go in and
To
repair it.
fix it.
So, but I mean that's a kind of faith. And in order to sign up with Alcor and have your body cryogenized, it takes a certain degree of like trust, one a kind of uh, arguably unjustified belief, which is one notion of what faith means, that
Yeah.
will someday have these magical technologies that will be able to revive us.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and yeah, and like that is you made a great point there about people overusing the word religion to apply to political philosophies or just philosophies in general. But I mean, the thing about religion, that I think the essence of a religion is that it has a teleology, that it has a concept of what the final destination of humans would be. And
Mhm.
I mean, of course, that's exactly what this is. And test, the TESCREALism, it isn't even necessarily atheistic either, because like Peter Thiel is not, he's a Christian, like
Mhm.
kind of this strange, Germanic Protestant hybrid of Christian, but like people often think of him as just another, atheist libertarian guy, but that's not what he's doing here. Um,
Yeah, there definitely are religious versions of transhumanism. So again,
yeah,
transhumanism itself is a kind of religion if you're an atheist and you buy into it. But also there are people who subscribe to traditional religious belief systems who are also transhuman. So Christian transhumanism, Mormon transhumanism is like a thing,
yeah.
you know. So yeah,
Well, because
it's quite
Mormonism in
interesting.
itself actually is, I mean, I used to be a Mormon, so
Ah,
I can tell you, like, Mormonism actually, you could argue, is transhumanism, because the point of in Mormonism, humans, like the God that humans know, is a former human.
mhm,
And so therefore Mormonism is transhumanism. Like that's the funny thing about Mormonism that a lot of people don't know, is that Mormonism, it prefigured a lot of the concepts that exist now. Like they
mhm,
basically kind of invented Christian nationalism. Also, it's in the Book of Mormon that
mhm,
the ancient Hebrews who came to America, they were only allowed to live there in the book if they worshiped Jesus. And then that was God's decree, that you couldn't live on this continent or
mhm,
hemisphere if you weren't Christian.
mhm,
And so like it's just over and over. If you don't do it, then God will kill you off. And
mhm.
so I mean now that's basically what like that's what the evangelicals now believe, and it's all based in the Bible, but like they hadn't really had any of these concepts until they came into contact with Mormonism, which is kind of funny.
It's fascinating.
But
Yeah.
yeah, all right. Well, so all right. So then we got the L here in wait, let's see. Yeah, C, actually C. Oh yeah,
Yeah,
for
yeah.
TESCREAL. Yeah.
So
So
we've
let's
gotten to
keep going.
TESS. So
Yeah.
Cosmism is basically so the E extropianism, S for singularitarianism, and C for cosmism. Those are just kind of variants of transhumanism. And there's lots to say about cosmism because this term goes back to the 19th 19th century, and was developed by some Russian thinkers. But really, what it denotes in the acronym is sort of Cosmism in its modern form. So this was developed by a computer scientist named Ben Goertzel, who was also the individual who christened the term artificial general intelligence. So he's played, a pretty significant role in in basically putting AGI, artificial general intelligence, on the radar. Making it an explicit goal of some of the most powerful and wealthy companies, billion dollar backed companies like OpenAI and DeepMind, their explicit goal. So yeah, Cosmism is just this idea that emerging technologies will not only enable us to radically modify the human organism, but once we spread into space, maybe we can engage in all sorts of manipulations and interventions on the universe that would enable us to basically just kind of redesign the universe itself. So, they talk about space-time engineering, the possibility of future scientific magic, which is just based on this idea that technologies could become so advanced that if they were presented to contemporary people, we would be just utterly baffled and perplexed and awed by them. So yeah, this scientific magic, space-time engineering, and AI plays a pretty significant role in Cosmism, but it doesn't presuppose that there will be a singularity. So maybe we'll be able to go out and re-engineer galaxies and maybe space-time itself, even if there isn't a singularity, this moment where the pace of technological progress accelerates beyond our comprehension. So yeah, so that's Cosmism, and that takes us to rationalism, and so these first a few ideologies are all just kind of variants of transhumanism, as I mentioned, and then from rationalism on, there's also a particular connection between all of those ideologies. So should we move on to rationalism?
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. So this was rationalism is an ideology that and a community that emerged out of a website, a community blogging website called Less Wrong, which was founded in 2009 by an individual named Eliezer Yudkowsky. And Yudkowsky is a transhumanist going back to the early 1990s who participated in the extropian movement, wrote about and anticipated, and with some excitement and later on a fair amount of trepidation, the technological singularity, and also has close connections with Ben Goertzel, who gave a talk at the Singularity Summit, which was organized by Ray Kurzweil, Eliezer Yudkowsky, and Peter Thiel. And so, yeah, rationalism is just the idea that, like, okay, if we're going to create this kind of techno-utopian, post-human future among the stars, in which there are trillions and trillions of future beings engaged in space-time engineering and so on, then that means we're going to need a lot of really smart people, quote-unquote smart people, doing a lot of really smart things. So let's try to take a step back and try to figure out how to optimize our smartness. In other words, how do we maximize our rationality? How do we, so there's a particular focus on like cognitive biases and trying to neutralize them, the use of cognitive heuristics, and
I'm sorry, and I have to say, like, some of their things that they come up with are just like they're cute, actually. Like, not even they're just so naive, like, because none of these people really had any background in philosophy or logic, and so like this was just like kind of a a communal. It was like the Wikipedia approach to epistemology, and so in some ways it's just laughably, laughably jejune, if you will. But I don't know. You tell me. What do you think?
I think that's exactly right. I mean, Yudkowsky himself is an autodidact who dropped out of, I think it was high school, maybe it was middle school, so never went to college, which is fine. One shouldn't be judged purely based on that.
But for sure,
nonetheless,
but it's like if you're just discovering Heidegger, or just coming into I don't know, the Plato's theory of forms, probably shouldn't be planning for the future of humanity.
I mean, one of the advantages of going to university is you get a kind of systematic introduction to human knowledge. And if you're not an autodidact, maybe you're just relying on Wikipedia and clicking from one hyperlink to another. Maybe you don't get that. So, anyways, I think a lot of people in the less wrong community um, tend to see themselves um, as intellectually superior in all sorts of ways. But my sense, at least, is that part of the reason for that being the case is many of them just like kind of it's there's a bit of a Dunning-Kruger effect, where people who don't know about an issue tend to be more confident in their um, knowledge of that issue because they just don't know what they
In
don't
their
know.
opinions, yeah, that's right, yeah.
Yeah. So, anyways, less wrong. There's a huge emphasis on a particular version of rationality, on Bayesianism, on certain approaches within decision theory. In fact, they've developed their own theories within decision theory, which have not had any real impact at all within academia. So they're very popular
Yeah.
among the less wrong people. But if you talk to actual experts, they're like, no, this is just kind of a silly
Well,
idea.
yeah, well, and to be honest, like the idea of applying the idea of funging mathematical probability, which is what Bayesian sort of theory is, to moral decisions, like it's ludicrous.
Yeah.
It makes no sense, and the idea that you're going to sort of eliminate all the cognitive biases or perception, not even like your process, but just things you can't even know about. Like,
Mhm.
it is literally impossible. That, like, it is just as dumb as these creationists, claiming, well, what are the odds of an eyeball evolving? It's 1 times 2 to the 37th power, and it's like, you can't fucking know that. You're
Yeah.
just pulling that number out of your ass.
Yeah.
And but you're doing it in a way that sounds vaguely mathematical. So you think it sounds good, but it's just absurd.
Yeah. Absolutely. There's an appearance of rigorousness and mathematical robustness to a lot of what the less wrong people talk about. But ultimately, yeah, I mean, it's you know, like Toby Ord, for example, who's a influential, effective altruist, co-founder of the movement. We'll talk about that in a moment, as well as one of the leading advocates of long-termism. He uh, estimates that, for example, the overall probability of an existential catastrophe within the next 100 years, from 2020, when he published his book on the topic, to 2120, is Russian roulette. So it's like, actually he just you know pulled this number out of a hat, and it's supposed to be like sort of adding up the probabilities of like climate change causing existential catastrophe, AI, and so on. But where do those numbers come from? Like nowhere. So at
No,
first
it's
glance,
garbage in, garbage out,
garbage in, garbage out.
right?
So yeah, at first glance, it looks pretty rigorous. But actually, it's just not at all. And so another example that I think illustrates the silliness of this sort of quantitative approach comes from a less wrong uh, uh, article that Yudkowsky authored, in which he argues that if you have a choice between two scenarios, one in which there's some unfathomable number of human beings who must suffer the almost imperceptible discomfort of having a dust speck in their eye. So you add up all of that discomfort and then compare it to a single person being relentlessly and horribly tortured for 50 years. You should choose torture. Because why should you choose torture? Because it's less bad. Overall, if you do the math, 50 years of being tortured is less total amount of suffering than all of these imperceptible. Just keep multiplying it, and eventually you get a number that is significantly large to justify this particular decision. So yeah, it's strange and weird, and it's there's a sort of a certain comfort uh, using these numbers and mathematical formulations, because the appearance of exactitude and precision with mathematics is one way to sort of eliminate a feeling of uncertainty, right? So like, okay, I'm in this moral situation where I have to choose between someone being tortured for 50 years or all of these people having a dust speck in their eye. What do I do? Well, you just crunch the numbers and you know that the dust specks scenario is worse. But ultimately, I think that sense of certainty and confidence is just completely misplaced. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. All right. Well, keeping on in the acronym here, then.
Yeah, so moving on to effective altruism, there was an EA, or effective altruist, who once told me that EA is basically what happens when rationalists pivot from thinking about rationality to thinking about morality. And I feel like that's a pretty good description of what effective altruists
Mhm.
are all about. So, they're basically using many of the same tools, the same kind of ideas from decision theory to navigate these moral situations. So, I mean, Yudkowsky basically addressed this in that article about dust specks, but EAs are, interested in like, okay, if I have a certain amount of money and I want to maximize the total amount of good that I do in the world. So maybe that means like saving the largest number of people possible. Should I give it to, disaster relief or to buy anti-malarial bed nets?
Malaria. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if you crunch the numbers, which, you know, maybe the numbers are ultimately kind of meaningless or misleading or something like that. If you just ignore the difficulties with that, if you crunch the numbers, you'll find that buying those bed nets wins every time. You just save many more lives than if you give to disaster relief. And so, yeah, EA's, I think this is another example of one of these ideologies that at first glance looks pretty reasonable because you just want to do the most good. But when you look at the details, all sorts of significant major problems emerge. So just to give another illustration, one of the ideas that was developed by effective altruists was this notion of earn to give. So maybe the best way to do the most good is not to go work for a nonprofit focused on animal welfare or environmental issues, but rather to go get the most lucrative job one can. Maybe that's at Wall Street, working for a petrochemical company, maybe it's at crypto. Perhaps it's for what Will McCaskill, another one of the co-founders, along with Toby Ord of Effective Altruism, what he calls immoral organizations. And so you go work for these immoral organizations, make a whole lot of money, and then take that money and donate it. Maybe that's the best way to do the most good. And so there are a bunch of EAs who have given up careers in academia and decided not to pursue getting or earning a medical degree in order to go work on Wall Street or in crypto or something like that. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, one of these individuals was a guy by the name of Sam Bankman-Fried. And he sat down with Will McCaskill in 2013, didn't really know what he was going to do with his life. And McCaskill said, you should earn to give. Sam Bankman-Fried was just graduating from MIT with a degree, I believe, in physics. And McCaskill said, yeah, go work on Wall Street. That's the best way to maximize your positive influence in the world. So he did that. He went to work on for a company called Jane Street Capital, where another EA took a job as well, Matthew Wage. Then he left after a few years, worked for the Center for Effective Altruism, and then decided to get into crypto. And probably most listeners are somewhat familiar with his story since then. He made billions of dollars, pledged all of this money to long-termist causes, and long-termism is one of the main cause areas of effective altruism. And then it turns out that he, as a long-termist utilitarian type person, committed massive amounts of fraud and is now facing all these felony charges. So yeah,
Mhm.
so there are a lot of ideas. Once you examine more closely the details of EA, the movement looks like actually it's just kind of flawed and in many ways kind of rotten uh, from one end to the other. For example, when you are just crunching these numbers, when ethics is just reduced to a branch of economics and it's just about number crunching, then because a lot of the numbers are pulled out of a hat, you can kind of justify anything. So the EA movement, the Center for Effective Altruism, basically was the organization that bought a palatial estate. So basically a palace called Wytham Abbey. You could look up pictures online. I mean, it's just this massive, old estate because they thought, well, that's that by purchasing this sumptuous, luxurious edifice in Oxfordshire, so a little bit outside of Oxford, where Center for Effective Altruism is based, they could maybe then attract people just like Sam Bankman-Fried. They'll be, oh, I'm impressed by this EA community. I went to and visited their palace basically, and they told me I could be a really, really good person by pursuing trying to become filthy rich through crypto or by working on Wall Street or whatever. And so they thought maybe this would be a good recruitment tool. And so they spent, I think it was 15 million pounds on this palace. And if you can crunch the numbers in a certain way such that this looks like maybe the best way to do the most good. But ultimately, take a step back. I mean, EA is, it's this like super wealthy organization, super wealthy movement that now is buying palatial estates, and something doesn't look right about that.
Yeah. Are you really helping
morally
humanity by? Yeah, are you really helping humanity by buying yourself a palace?
You can justify
Yeah,
it.
well,
You
and
get the numbers to work.
yeah, it's true, and and you can see this sort of fungibility of ethics and economics. I mean, you can see that even just in more mundane news, like with Donald Trump and the trial that he's having right now for having committed all this fraud in the state of New York. And he's claiming, well, it's just all about me, overestimating the value of my properties. That's all this is, and it's all fungible. You can say anything is worth any amount of money. It doesn't matter. And and he's right about that in some regard, but of course that's not actually what he's on trial for. He's on trial for lying about the square footage of things and the number of bedrooms for things, and what the taxable value, or that's the actual trial. But the overall moral point he's trying to make is actually correct here and applicable in this case. And I would say also, though, the idea of effective altruism and libertarianism, like, again, this is Ayn Rand all over again, because according to Ayn Rand, the best and most moral action is to serve yourself. That it is the gospel of selfishness, as some of her contemporary critics had called it at the time. And this is just Ayn Rand all over again, and like that's kind of the hilarious and maybe but also disturbing reality of when you look at all these ideas. Like they fashion themselves as newfangled and all about the future, but they're just literally the recycled rantings of this crazy woman from the 1920s.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. But I mean, but in addition to being, just kind of intellectually insipid, it's worse than that, though, because these people have so much money. I mean, Elon Musk is a devotee. Peter Thiel is another one. Like they have more money. People with this, sort of delusional mass, levels of delusion, mass levels of delusion. They've never had this level of money in human history. In the past, people who got super rich, they just, were addicted to money. That's all. That's the only thing they really wanted, was to get more money. But these guys have something else on their minds, and they're really pushing for it, and like kind of distorting our politics, not just in the U.S. but in other countries as well. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, as you suggest, the EA and long term is really the TESCREAL movement in general. has just billions and billions of dollars. I mean, tens of billions of dollars behind it. Some of the most influential people in the world are advocates of long-termism, or Peter Thiel gave a keynote address at an EA conference. EA, like one of their main conferences. So it wasn't just like some kind of fringe EA group, but yeah. So already they're just extremely powerful from a kind of with respect to how much money they have, but they're also increasingly trying to infiltrate the political arena. And so Toby Ord, who I mentioned earlier, co-founder of EA, who's one of the main long-termists, he's been an advisor for UK government reports, a report that was released by the United Nations. In fact, a UN Dispatch article from last year mentions that, and I'm more or less quoting here, foreign policy circles in general, in the United Nations in particular, are beginning to embrace long-termism, which again is just a variant of EA. And last year also there was or was it earlier this year? I can't quite remember. There was a candidate for Congress from Oregon who was in EA, EA long-termist, who got a record-breaking amount of campaign money from Sam Bankman-Fried, and was running on basically a kind of long-termist platform. Ultimately lost by a large margin, I think, because people were kind
And
of
was a
weirded out.
Democrat.
And was a Democrat.
Yeah, and he was a Democrat.
Yeah,
Like that's important to note. Because
yeah,
and
absolutely.
Bankman-Fried gave millions and millions of dollars to Democrats.
Yeah, as
And
well as
and
Republican.
like that is it's real vulnerability. Yeah, as Republicans, yeah. And so this is like these are serious issues, and the other thing also is that they're trying to sort of distort you know not just the campaign finance system but also the educational systems as
Mhm.
well. So you had mentioned some of the Oxford connections with EA. You want to talk about some of that a little bit?
So rationalism was really a product of mostly of people who were based in Silicon Valley. EA was developed primarily by people based at Oxford University. And so William McCaskill, Toby Ord, Nick Bostrom, was co-founder of long-termism, has been very influential. And yeah, so at Oxford over the past 5 years or so, there's been a proliferation of different institutes that are very well funded and are explicitly committed to EA values, in many cases to long-termist values, because long-termism has become probably the most influential cause area within EA. So EA initially was focused just on alleviating global poverty. And then it expanded to include animal welfare and long-termism, because basically EA's realized that, okay, if I want to, the future of humanity could be really, really big. And the total number of people who could exist in the far future could be enormous. And so if my goal is to positively influence the greatest number of people, and most people who could exist will exist in the very far future, then maybe the best way to maximize my positive influence on the greatest number of people is to focus on the very far future rather than the present. So it's not that future people matter more. It's just a numbers game. Once again, you can see a theme here. There's just so many
Yep.
more possible people in the very far future if we
That they matter
live
more. Yeah.
that they just in aggregate they matter more.
Yeah, and somehow these guys are able to know what will help them and not anybody else. No one else knows how to help them.
Yeah, and so you have all of these institutes now affiliated with Oxford, so they get to leech off of the prestige of Oxford's name, and there's so much money that they're able to attract people to work on EA long-termist causes, uh, even if those people don't really subscribe to the worldview. So I've spoken to many people in the community who more or less agree with my critiques, but say, first point out that the philosophy job market is absolutely horrendous, which is true. And here you've got a community of people who have just enormous amounts of money. So much money they don't know what to do with it. You know, they literally they're giving out $100,000 prizes, 5 of them, to blogs on EA, you know, or long-termist issues. Just if the blog looks good, we'll just give you $100,000. That's how much money they have. You know, just, they don't know what to do with it. And so consequently, you get a bunch of people who like don't even subscribe to the long-termist or EA worldview, but are nonetheless cogs in that machine that is propelling forward this particular worldview, these ideologies. And so, yeah, there is a kind of capture that they have achieved within academia, and yeah, it's a bit it's worrisome. There's so much self-censorship in that community. It's kind of amazing. I mean, I think one of the reasons that my situation was unique is that I was basically the only person over the past, I don't know, 5 years who was in this community for a long time, was in this community and is critical, and crucially has publicly come out as critical. Pretty much everybody else is just still in that community because they're getting paid. You know, people ultimately at the end of the day, people just want to be able to put food on the table.
Support
And
themselves. Yeah.
yeah, and I'm sympathetic with that. So yeah, anyways, it's a worrisome situation because there's a kind of momentum that they're able to build within academia. I mean, even though if you go and talk to professional philosophers, I would say that the large majority would say that EA and long-termism are misguided or perhaps just complete non-starters. It's just like utterly bizarre. I mean, a lot of people would look at the arguments for why long-termism is true and say that argument is a reductio. So rather than the long-termist saying, here's an argument that supports my long-termist conclusions, they'd say you shouldn't accept those conclusions precisely because the arguments are so bizarre. It's so unconvincing, you know. So, but nonetheless, they've got so much money and so much power that they're able to, you know, still attract this, still have
Well,
a
is
presence
it
in Oxford. And yeah, sorry.
for sure? Yeah. No. Well, so I mean, so these ideas are so, you know, they're so rich and they're so influential, but also so obscure. I mean, do people when you have tried to talk to people about this stuff? I mean, I feel like some people when they hear about it, they just can't believe it's even real, and like it's just so weird and dumb to them that they can't, you know, they don't even want to take it seriously. Has that been your experience
So
in
I
dealing
am
with some
I am
people?
thinking of writing a book on the TESCREAL bundle of ideologies. And
Mhm.
one of the ways that I might open it is by mentioning exactly this issue that um, the second half of 2022, there were a whole bunch of reporters that got in touch with me about long-termism, EA, transhumanism. What are these ideologies? I didn't have that acronym coined yet. I mean, the acronym was developed by Dr. Timnit Gebru and I coined it, but she played an integral role in sort of developing this concept. So even before that acronym existed, you know, people were basically just curious about the TESCREAL bundle. And so reporters would contact me. I'd give an interview, explain what long-termism is and what this techno-utopian vision of our post-human future among the heavens consists of. That is at the very heart of the TESCREAL bundle. And on numerous occasions, I had reporters come back to me and say, I talked to my editor, and there is no way they're going to publish an article on this because they told me, whoever you spoke to, which is me, clearly is just like making stuff up, doesn't know what you're talking about, because it's so bizarre that like go tell whoever you spoke to that you know they are
Making
they're
this
just
up.
making this up, and whoever they are, don't believe them and move on to another topic. And then fast forward like 6 months later, I'd have the same reporters contact me and say, my editor has read some stuff, understands now that you were completely accurate about all of this, and so we want to publish an article, and you know could you be interviewed for that? So it was amazing. You're exactly right. There's so many people who first come across this and think it is so strange it just can't be true, or they'll read something I wrote and think, you know, I'll give you
He's
one last
exaggerating. Yeah.
quick example. There was an author who published an article in the Los Angeles Review of Books, and they cited a current affairs article that I published on long-termism. And in their LARB, so Los Angeles Review of Books, in their LARB article, they referred to my article as, they used the word hyperbolic. And like, oh, it's just a bit like unhinged, this article that I wrote. Fast forward 8 months later, the same person is citing my current affairs article in their articles in an approving manner. Like, actually, if you want to know more about this, go look at the current affairs article by Émile P. Torres. So it was just yet another example of somebody who, like, thought like this is just crazy, and my current affairs article is just completely unhinged and is probably completely misrepresenting these ideologies. Then they did some research and went like, oh, actually, that's completely on point. And so,
well, it's like I said in the intro. Yeah, truth is stranger than fiction in this case, for sure.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, what? Maybe now it's your turn to play futurist here. What is the future of this ideology? And I mean, are people who are want a more democratic present, what can they do about it? Or are they doomed to win because no one takes it seriously until they have all the power? I mean, what's your thought?
Yeah, good question. So I don't have any suggestions for how exactly to counter it, except that step number one is just understanding what it is. Sort of just naming it and understanding that it's potentially dangerous. Beyond that, I kind of don't know yet. So one thing it's a topic that I would like to reflect more on, especially if I end up writing this book. But I mean, so the TESCREAL movement, EAs and long-termists in particular, made a huge effort beginning not last summer, but summer 2022, to evangelize for this worldview among the public, to the public. And it just completely backfired. Will McCaskill was, published a book in August of, I think it was August of 2022, summer of that year, and had a promotional budget ceiling of $10 million, maybe more than that, just an enormous amount of money. And he ended up on the Daily Show and New York Times, Time Magazine, New Yorker, and so on covered it. So there was and for a while, the community and McCaskill and so on were flying high. Again, he was on the Daily Show, and like that's just kind of an amazing thing. Had this long chat with Trevor Noah, who was very very just impressed by McCaskill. And then FTX collapsed, and all of a sudden you had these news articles saying Sam Bankman-Fried looks like he committed truly massive amounts of fraud that maybe makes Bernie Madoff look like just a bumbling amateur. and right there in those first paragraphs of so many of these articles was Sam Bankman-Fried is an effective altruist and or a long-termist. So, oh my gosh, it just this PR push just completely backfired, and it was just kind of downhill from then. There was just one scandal after the other. The Wytham Abbey thing came out. There was an email that I stumbled upon in which Nick Bostrom, one of the most influential figures in this community, said, quote, "Blacks are more stupid than whites," and then he used the N-word. And so, that was really bad press. And so anyways, all of that's to say that the reputation of long-termism, EA, and TESCREALism in general among the public is kind of in shambles right now. And I don't know if it can really be repaired. Its connection.
But it may not matter, though. That's the thing.
That's exactly. You're 100% right about that. That's my worry. Is maybe that doesn't matter because they have so much power and so many connections to hugely influential figures in Silicon Valley, figures who are making decisions that affect all of society, the way society is organized, that affect our lives, the lives of our children and grandchildren, maybe grandchildren. Because what they're doing with AI right now, that may have long-term consequences for our societies. So
Yeah.
maybe it doesn't matter if the public thinks long-termism is nutty and effective altruism is flawed, and have those ideologies just really intimately connected with SBF, a fraudster, and so on. Maybe it doesn't matter. And so this is the big worry, and this is the reason why I think, writing a book about this topic might be warranted, because I think these ideologies are kind of here to stay, at least for the foreseeable future. And
Yeah.
again, what can we do about that? I don't really know yet, but
Yeah.
it
Well,
worries
one
me.
thing, yeah. Well, one thing people can do, and I think they really need to do, is that, the, so I used to be on the political right. I created, several large right-wing media institutions, and then having switched over to the left, I can tell you, the level of professionalism, the knowledge of how politics works is just significantly lower on the left. Um,
That sounds right.
and yeah, and a lot of it just simply is that they don't pay attention to, like the political theory. They don't pay attention to, sort of the way that messaging work. They don't understand what polls are for. Polls are not for to help you determine what you should do. They're for how to sell what you want to do.
Mhm.
That's how you use polls, and they don't seem to understand any of that stuff. And they don't build institutions, and they don't help people have careers. So like what we need, people who are, watching or listening to this, you guys have to tell the people in your lives that
Mhm.
this stuff matters, and you need to get that message pushed out into the food chain, the progressive food chain, as much as you can, individually, and and including supporting people like yourself who are, writing about technology from a pro-democracy standpoint, and trying to call attention to this stuff, because it's really important. Even if you personally are not, a tech person, or you don't think of yourself as a philosophy geek or whatever, you need to understand that this stuff's really important, even if you're not into it, and encourage people to support, writers, and podcasters and whatever, who are into this stuff. So that's one thing I would say, at least. Um,
I would agree with all that. Yeah.
okay. All right. Well, yeah, this has been a good conversation. We're probably going to have future ones, to kind of keep tabs on these people, and so I'm glad we were able to do this first one here.
This is fantastic. Yeah, it was really lovely chatting with you.
Okay, good. And so for people who want to keep up with you, where would you recommend that they do so?
Yeah, as of now, I'm still on Twitter/X, and
Hmm.
my handle is at X Riskology. So, as in the study of risk. So, X Riskology. Um, but I'm also on Blue Sky with that same handle. And
Okay.
yeah, and my
And then
website
your
is,
website. Yeah.
yeah, www.xriskology.com. So there's continuity here. Um,
Okay,
so yeah,
cool. Well, great. I'm glad we were able to do this. Thanks very much for, being on Theory of Change, Phil.
thanks so much for having me. It's great.
All right, so that's the program for today. I appreciate everybody for joining us for the discussion. And if you want to get more of the show, just go to theoryofchange.show, where you can get the archives with video, audio, and transcripts of all the episodes. And then if you like this program, you can also get some other ones that I am on, through the flux.community website. We've got several other ones there worth checking out. So I encourage everybody to do that. And if you are interested in supporting the show, you can go to patreon.com/discoverflux, where you can sign up for a, membership level. And we also have, memberships on the theoryofchange.show, address. You can subscribe on Substack, as a free option or as a paid option. And I am very grateful to everybody who is, sustaining the show. I definitely need your help with that. I couldn't do it without you. So thank you very much. And I think that will do it for, today. Thank you, everybody, for watching, listening, or reading. I'll see you next time.